Nightfall is the first true dividing line between those who adapt and those who vanish. Daytime gives the illusion of margin, but the moment society fractures, daylight becomes a rapidly collapsing asset. Every hour bleeds into the next with a ruthless countdown, and when the sun drops, so does every form of inherited safety. In the world that existed before, night was an inconvenience. In the world you stand in now, night is a predator, and it does not negotiate. The operational truth is blunt. Before darkness settles, you must complete a sequence of non-optional actions, or you will enter the lethal window unprepared. The world you remember, law, structure, noise, predictable movement, has collapsed. The new world functions on primal math, not sentiment. You are judged not by intention, but by execution. The collapse removes illusions quickly, and the first one to die is the illusion that you have time. You don't. You never did. What stands before you is the zero-margin window, the narrow slice between societal breakdown and nocturnal exposure. In this window, hesitation is not a flaw. It's a death sentence. You must think in vectors, not emotions. You must act in protocols, not improvisations. The environment is no longer passive background. It's an active field filled with unknown human variables, shifting threats, and collapsing infrastructure. Every sound becomes data. Every shadow becomes a question. Every person becomes a potential competitor for the same dwindling resources. The day belongs to confusion, but the night belongs to predators, human or otherwise. And the unprepared are simply processed by the new order. You must anchor yourself into a new identity before nightfall. Not a citizen, not a bystander, but an operator in hostile terrain. This identity shift is not philosophical. It is tactical. Operators survive because they erase uncertainty and impose structure on chaos. They operate with cold logic, disengaging from nostalgia and clinging to operational priorities like lifelines. Nightfall punishes sentimentality with mathematical precision. The world has pivoted, and you must pivot with it. Understand this clearly. Night is not the enemy. Night is the test. And only those who execute before it arrives will still be standing when it breaks. Your survival begins now in daylight, in the shrinking hours where every decision carries exponential weight. This is where you define your position, build your perimeter, shape your odds, and lock your mind. Because once the sun disappears, your mistakes will not. When society collapses, the first asset that evaporates is certainty. Before nightfall, your single overriding objective is to re-establish situational dominance, an unbroken understanding of what surrounds you, what moves around you, and what intends to move toward you. Without it, you enter darkness blind, and blindness in a post-collapse environment is not ignorance. It is surrender. The world has shifted into a predatory configuration, and anything you fail to detect becomes something that will detect you. This is the operational baseline. If you do not map your environment before the sun falls, you forfeit control of the night. Situational dominance is not intuition. It is deliberate reconnaissance executed with methodical calm. You begin by securing visual authority. That means raising your perspective. Height equals information. Whether it's a rooftop, a stairwell, a hillside, or the roof of an abandoned vehicle, elevation converts confusion into clarity. From height, movement patterns reveal themselves. Where civilians are clustering, where opportunists are circling, where panic is pooling into choke zones. You observe not to feel safer, but to calculate threat density and identify your operational lanes. Daylight exposes patterns. Night erases them. You read the terrain now because after sunset, the terrain reads you. The next layer is sound mapping. In collapse zones, sound becomes intelligence. Human panic has a texture, metallic impacts have a rhythm, distant engines create directional vectors, and breaking glass broadcasts proximity. Every sound is a breadcrumb that leads you toward or away from danger. You must listen with predatory awareness, stripping emotion from interpretation. A scream tells you more about location than morality. A crowd tells you more about risk than intention. In collapse logic, sound is a language, and fluency is survival. Then comes the perimeter analysis. This is not about building defenses yet. It's about stripping uncertainty. You move through your immediate environment with slow precision, tracking access points, blind corners, concealment routes, and high-probability entry vectors for both people and opportunistic threats. You are not marking territory, you are interrogating it. Every doorway must be registered. Every alley must be understood. Every possible line of approach must be indexed before night steals visibility. A perimeter you do not study by day becomes a perimeter that hunts you by night. Finally, you calculate the human variables. In collapse, people move differently. Desperation has a signature. Opportunism has a rhythm. Violence has an orbit. Before nightfall, you must identify which individuals are disorganized civilians, which are forming clusters of opportunistic extraction, and which possess the posture of predators waiting for daylight to fade. Night empowers the worst versions of people. You must identify them before their advantage manifests. By sunset, you need to know the terrain, the sounds, the movement, and the human currents. When darkness comes, you are not surprised, because surprise is what ends unprepared survivors quietly. Situational dominance isn't arrogance. It is survival through awareness. The world has become hostile, but daylight still grants you the chance to understand it. Waste that chance, and night will erase you. In a functioning society, water and heat are infrastructure, silent, invisible, and taken for granted. When the collapse tears that infrastructure apart, your body becomes an exposed biological machine, degrading hour by hour. Before nightfall, your mission is to secure the two inputs that dictate whether that machine remains operational: hydration and thermoregulation. You are no longer living in a world where comfort exists. You are living in a world where the absence of water and warmth is a countdown to failure. And night accelerates that countdown with merciless efficiency. The first operational truth is simple. Dehydration is not a long-term threat. It is a short-term neurological collapse. Your cognition degrades, your decision-making fractures, your physical coordination deteriorates. This isn't fatigue. This is system-wide failure. Before darkness takes the landscape, you must hunt water the way others hunt safety. Daylight is the only window where you can move far enough, search wide enough, and expose yourself long enough to secure what you need without the amplified risks of nocturnal movement. You do not wait. You do not assume. You locate water now. Rain catchers, abandoned containers, natural runoff, broken municipal lines, or even scavenged bottled stock from deserted structures. If it is questionable, you purify. If you cannot purify, you filter. If you cannot filter, you settle for clarity over turbidity and accept the lesser risk because collapse survival is not perfection. It is probability management. You choose what keeps you alive today so you can solve tomorrow. Heat follows the same logic. Without it, you become prey to your own physiology. Even in climates that seem forgiving, nightfall introduces microclimates, shaded zones, wind corridors, moisture pockets. each capable of stripping body temperature faster than you anticipate. Hypothermia does not announce itself with drama. It begins with subtle motor decline and ends with cognitive shutdown so quiet you won't notice the moment you stop fighting. Before night arrives, your focus is to secure thermal protection, not through reliance on fire alone, but through layers, insulation, wind blocking, and environmental positioning. Fire is an asset and a liability. Warmth at the cost of visibility. You prepare for fire as a controlled tool, not a default response. That means tinder gathered before dusk, ignition sources checked, redundancies in place. You never allow the first spark to be attempted in darkness. Night is where fine motor skills betray you. The principle governing both water and heat is uncompromising. Inputs before comfort. Comfort has no operational value. Inputs keep the organism alive. You secure water even if you are not thirsty. You secure warmth even if the air feels mild. You prepare before the need becomes urgent, because urgency arrives only when options have already evaporated. Most who fail in early collapse environments do not die from violence. They die from preventable biological degradation amplified by the cold indifference of night. As daylight thins, you must have your hydration supply and thermal strategy locked, contained, and reachable without exposing yourself to nocturnal hazards. When the world descends into darkness, those without water become desperate, and the desperate become dangerous. Those without warmth become slow, and the slow become silent casualties. You eliminate both vulnerabilities now in the last hours of predictable light. Nightfall does not care about your endurance. It cares only about whether you prepared your body to survive it. Nightfall transforms the world from chaotic to predatory, and the only barrier between you and that predation is the structure you choose, or fail, to defend. In a collapse, shelter is no longer a place to rest. It is a micro-fortress, a controlled geometry designed to reduce exposure, slow intrusion, and give you a tactical advantage when visibility collapses. Before darkness arrives, you are not looking for comfort, space, or familiarity. You are looking for defensibility. You are looking for a location where you dictate the terms of engagement, not the environment, not the opportunists, and not the panic-driven masses drifting through the ruins of the old world. The operational reality is this: large spaces kill. Open rooms, big windows, sprawling houses, they are liabilities masquerading as safety. Your objective before nightfall is to compress your world into a space small enough to control and strong enough to reinforce. A micro-fortress is not about luxury. It is about angles. Angles you can cover, angles you can predict, angles you can close. You select the structure with 3 factors in mind: limited entry points, natural concealment, and a position that does not broadcast occupancy. Visibility is death after sunset. Any building that announces your presence becomes a magnet for those who waited all day for darkness to level the playing field. Once inside, daylight becomes your final opportunity to reshape the environment in your favor. You identify every approach vector: doorways, hallways, windows, vents, gaps in walls. You are not decorating, you are rerouting. You convert wide entries into choke points. You create forced path channels that make intruders predictable. You move debris not for cleanliness, but for sound traps, objects that will betray movement in the dark long before intruders cross your defensive threshold. A micro-fortress is built on the principle of asymmetry. You must hear them before they reach you, see them before they see you, and control the terrain they must cross to reach your position. The daylight hours are the only time you can shape that terrain with any margin. Night removes that privilege. Then comes concealment. A good fortress is not one that looks strong. It is one that looks empty. You hide signs of your presence, no visible light sources, no movement silhouettes, no obvious barricades visible from outside. You operate under the doctrine of invisibility. The safest shelter is the one that no one believes is occupied. Raiders seek targets of opportunity, not challenges. Desperate civilians gravitate toward activity, noise, or signs of inhabitation. You give them none. You must become a ghost in the structure you choose, invisible by intention, protected by geometry. But the final layer is psychological control. A microfortress must serve one function above all, allowing you to survive the longest hours of collapse, the silent, merciless interval between sundown and sunrise where fear intensifies, sound distorts, and time stretches into a testing ground for human instability. In that darkness, most people fall apart internally long before external threats reach them. Your shelter must mitigate that collapse. It must feel controlled, predictable, and structurally sound enough that your mind does not betray you. Panic inside a shelter is just as lethal as intrusion from outside. When night comes, you do not want to be wandering, searching, or improvising. You want to be inside a space you understand intimately, a space where every creak, draft, and shadow is already mapped, a space where you dominate the angles, a space where intrusion becomes a slow, noisy, predictable process instead of a silent ambush. This is the essence of defensible shelter in a world stripped of order. Nightfall does not forgive those who rely on luck. It forgives only those who prepare their fortress before darkness claims the horizon. Before society fell, the environment was a backdrop, static, predictable, indifferent. After collapse, the environment becomes a weapon, and the first rule of survival is brutally simple. If you do not shape the terrain before nightfall, someone else will shape it against you. The world is no longer neutral ground. It is contested space, and every corner, corridor, alleyway, and abandoned structure becomes a potential engine of advantage or a ready-made kill zone. Your mission before darkness is to weaponize this space, not with fantasy, not with theatrics, but with cold, practical geometry that turns the terrain into an extension of your will. Weaponizing the environment begins with denial. You deny intruders the paths they prefer. You deny them silence, access, and surprise. The daylight hours give you the visibility to understand the ways people naturally move, where their feet gravitate, which routes provide cover, which shadows offer concealment, which choke points funnel the desperate and the predatory alike. You interrupt those routes. You alter them. You degrade them. You convert them. You take every easy path leading toward your micro-fortress and you make it slow, noisy, or painful. Not by building fortifications worthy of cinema, but by rearranging reality. Debris becomes obstruction. Furniture becomes blockade. Broken terrain becomes deterrent. Even subtle displacement, shifting a door half off its hinge, dragging a heavy object into a narrow hallway, sprinkling shards across a blind approach, creates friction. Friction buys time. Time buys survival. Then comes forced path engineering. This is the art of shaping where an intruder must move. Darkness will embolden the opportunists who avoided confrontation during the day. They will probe blindly, clumsily, emotionally. They are not disciplined. They're desperate. Your advantage comes from forcing these individuals into predictable lines of travel. You engineer paths where you gain visual superiority while they lose momentum. A blocked left corridor pushes them right. A barricaded window redirects them to the only door you control. A narrow entry funnels them single file, removing their numbers as an advantage. You are not simply defending space, you are dictating how conflict would unfold hours before it ever begins. Sound is your next weapon. In daylight, you design the night's early warnings. Cans, glass fragments, loose metal, dry branches. Each is a primitive sensor that broadcasts intrusion before it becomes proximity. A careless footstep becomes a signal. A shifting object becomes an alarm. You place these deliberately, not as traps to injure, but as traps to inform. Injury is uncertain. Sound is instant. Night belongs to those who hear first, not those who strike hardest. Light discipline is another layer of environmental warfare. Before sunset, you identify where external light sources may silhouette your movement. You eliminate those exposures. You reposition yourself so that even moonlight cannot betray your outline to a patient observer. At the same time, you identify how environmental shadows can conceal your escape vector if the fortress is compromised. Weaponizing the environment means understanding that darkness is both threat and tool. A shadow that hides you is a shield. A shadow that hides others is a vulnerability you must account for. Understanding the difference is the work of daylight. Finally, you pre-engineer the escape geometry. No fortress is absolute. No defense is perfect. The environment must contain not just your protection, but your exit. Before the sun disappears, you identify the route that allows you to vanish without hesitation if the defensive posture collapses. This is not cowardice. This is operational realism. A survivor lives because they refuse to die over a stubborn attachment to one position. Your escape path must be invisible from outside, unlit and free of obstacles you cannot navigate in total darkness. The moment you need it will not be the moment you have time to think. When night falls, the environment will not be neutral. It will be either your ally or your executioner. The difference depends entirely on what you did in the hours before the light disappeared. Those who walk into darkness unprepared will encounter obstacles they didn't place, traps they didn't design, and ambush points they didn't anticipate. Those who weaponize the world in daylight enter the night with the world fighting on their side. In collapse logic, your environment is not where you survive. It is how you survive. When the sun disappears, movement stops being an action and becomes a gamble. One played with odds you cannot see, variables you cannot measure, and consequences that unfold faster than you can react. In a functioning society, night is an inconvenience. In a collapsed one, night is an apex predator, and it hunts those who move without necessity. Your objective before sunset is to establish night protocols, rules of movement and non-movement that override instinct, override fear, override impulse. These rules are not suggestions. They are survival law. The first law is harsh. You do not move at night unless the alternative is death. Darkness compresses your senses, erases depth perception, distorts sound, and amplifies threat behavior. Those who move after sunset are rarely hunters. They are usually the hunted who don't yet realize it. Once night takes the environment, the old assumption that distance equals safety collapses. You can be tracked easier than you can track. You can be heard clearer than you can hear. And you can be cornered faster than you can escape. Before night falls, you design the guidelines that will keep you anchored. Where you can move, when you can move, why you can move, and under what conditions movement becomes mandatory instead of suicidal. But movement is not the only hazard. Non-movement is equally dangerous when executed without discipline. People freeze in the wrong places. They choose static positions that betray them. They misjudge shadows, overestimate concealment, underestimate acoustics. Before night arrives, you decide exactly where you will remain, how long you will remain there, and what posture you must maintain to stay responsive. Stillness is not safety unless it is intentional. In collapse logic, a motionless survivor in the wrong spot is just a slow-moving target hiding behind false confidence. The next protocol is the control of light. Nothing in collapse betrays your position faster than illumination. It is the single greatest tactical mistake committed by amateurs in the dark. Even a flicker announces your location with perfect accuracy to anyone with line of sight. Before nightfall, you eliminate every potential light leak, reflective surfaces, windows, door cracks, glossy objects, and anything that can bounce or broadcast even a fragment of brightness. Your aim is absolute light discipline. You prepare your tools, your heat sources, your gear, and your shelter so that no part of your existence announces itself to opportunists navigating the darkness. Light destroys stealth instantly, and stealth is the only shield you have when sight evaporates. Then comes the sound dimension. In darkness, sound carries farther, sharper, and more deceptively. A misplaced footstep becomes a beacon. A dropped tool becomes an invitation. Even controlled breathing can betray proximity if the night is still enough. Before sunset, you pre-plan every action you must perform during the night: where you will step, where you will rest, what you will reach for, how you will shift weight, how you will manage your equipment. You strip your pockets of items that rattle. You adjust clothing so fabric doesn't scuff. You position objects so they cannot fall. Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the elimination of surprise. Night rewards the quiet and consumes the careless. Threat migration is another factor you account for before the light fades. When the sun goes down, human behavior shifts. Those who hid during daylight emerge. Those who feared crowds move with new confidence. Those planning to exploit the dark begin their circuits. Night is when the bold turn predatory and the desperate turn reckless. Before dusk, you identify where these nocturnal flows will move: abandoned storefronts, darkened alleys, collapsed roads, shelters showing signs of occupancy. You predict their routes based on how people behave during daylight, then map avoidance zones you will not cross. Understanding threat migration removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is lethal after dark. Finally, you define your fallback rules. Night is unforgiving, and even the best plans collapse under pressure. You pre-establish the conditions under which you will abandon your position: when you will run, when you will hide deeper, when you will remain still no matter what auditory distortion the darkness throws at you. Without these rules, fear will improvise decisions for you, and fear is an incompetent strategist. Night protocols exist for one purpose: to ensure you do not step into the dark as prey. When the sun sets, survival depends not on strength, not on courage, not on instinct, but on the discipline you established in the final hours of light. Nightfall is not chaos. It is a battlefield with rules. And those who establish their rules early walk through the night unseen. Those who don't become part of the darkness in a different, irreversible way. In the post-collapse world, information is not a luxury. It is the only currency that still holds value when everything else has been stripped away. Food can be stolen. Supplies can be lost. Shelter can be compromised. But intelligence, once acquired, cannot be taken from you. Before nightfall, you must construct an intelligence loop, a self-sustaining cycle of observation, interpretation, and prediction that keeps you several steps ahead of threats that thrive in darkness. Without this loop, you are not surviving. You are drifting, blind, reactive, and one miscalculation away from disappearing into the statistical noise of the fallen world. The loop begins with external signals. Collapse does not erase human behavior, it distorts it. And distorted behavior leaves patterns for those sharp enough to detect them. In daylight, you read these patterns with cold detachment. Smoke columns tell you where conflict ignited, or where desperate individuals attempted fire without discipline. Abandoned vehicles reveal panic routes, where people fled, where they clogged roads, where they made last-minute directional changes under duress. A car stopped abruptly at an intersection means someone panicked. A cluster of vehicles near a storefront means resource competition. A single vehicle parked at an angle with doors open indicates rapid extraction or confrontation. These are not scenes, they are data points. You study them to understand not what happened, but what will happen next. Then you analyze noise signatures. Collapse soundscapes are brutally honest. Distant shouting is a sign of a crowd losing command structure. Sudden metallic crashes indicate forced entry attempts or improvised extraction. Rhythmic bangs suggest coordinated probing, individuals testing doors, shutters, or barricades. A single scream tells a different story than a series of short ones. The trained observer hears not just the noise, but the psychology behind it. Fear has a pitch, aggression has a tempo, opportunism has a cadence. You listen with the intent to map threat clusters before darkness amplifies them. Human movement becomes the next layer of intelligence. During daylight, people reveal who they are by how they move. The aimless wanderers are victims of shock. They collapse quickly when night arrives. The hurried, tightly grouped clusters are families or cooperative civilians. They rarely pose immediate danger but gravitate toward resource hubs you must avoid. The isolated, slow-moving individuals who scan instead of flee are the ones you mark. They are the early predators, the ones whose confidence grows as the sun lowers. These are not moral judgments, they are operational categories. And if you fail to categorize them before nightfall, you will have no framework to predict their nocturnal behavior. Your intelligence loop tightens when you identify resource zones. In collapse conditions, any location holding water, fuel, heat, or shelter becomes an attractor, and attractors become flashpoints. Before sunset, you map these zones and measure their gravitational pull. How many people noticed them? How many avoided them? How aggressively they were approached? A resource zone with too little activity is a trap. A resource zone with too much activity becomes a magnet for conflict. The survivor's advantage is not in acquiring resources first, but in understanding which resource points will turn lethal after dark. But the most critical layer of your intelligence loop is internal. You must monitor yourself. In collapse settings, your own cognitive distortions become threats as real as any external force. Fatigue alters perception. Fear amplifies neutral sounds. Stress compresses situational awareness. Before nightfall, you run a self-diagnostic, not emotional, but analytical. Are your decisions reactive or strategic? Are you moving with purpose or drifting out of instinct? Internal noise corrupts external interpretation. If your mind fractures, your intelligence fractures with it. The most dangerous survivor is one who thinks they are interpreting reality accurately when they are not. When these layers integrate, signals, noise, movement, resource gravity, internal state, you create a feedback loop that remains active even in darkness. That is the goal. Intelligence gathered in daylight must remain operational when visibility collapses. It becomes a map in your head, a silent guide that tells you when to move, when to freeze, where danger is likely to converge, and which directions remain viable when chaos swallows the horizon. Most people enter Nightfall with hope as their strategy. Operators enter Nightfall with intelligence as their shield. Hope fails. Intelligence predicts. It anticipates. It neutralizes surprise long before surprise becomes fatal. When the sun drops, the world does not become random. It becomes sharper, more honest, more revealing for those who studied it. Those who didn't remain blind. And in the dark, the blind do not survive. Long before the first threat reaches your shelter, long before hunger or cold or exhaustion erodes your physical limits, the collapse attacks something far more fragile: your mind. Survival is not a test of strength. It is a test of psychological order under conditions designed to dismantle it. Before Nightfall, your final and most decisive task is to impose structure on your internal world, to lock your mind into an operational state that will endure the long hours of darkness where fear multiplies, noise deceives, and time becomes an adversary of its own. In the old world, mental resilience was admirable. In the new world, it is the dividing line between the functional and the doomed. The collapse strips away predictability, and without predictability, the brain begins to seek patterns that are not there. This is cognitive narrowing, when stress compresses your perception into a tunnel, where every sound becomes threat, every shadow becomes intrusion, every silence becomes proof that danger is approaching. If you enter Nightfall in this state, your decisions will fracture. You will misinterpret harmless signals as lethal ones and miss the actual threats emerging in the edges of your awareness. Before the sun dips below the ruins of the old world, you must stabilize your mind through deliberate cold ritual. The first ritual is acceptance. You acknowledge the collapse without resistance. You do not cling to the world that died. Nostalgia clouds judgment, and judgment is now currency. You mentally sever the expectation that anyone is coming to help, that order will return, that systems will reactivate. When you remove those illusions, clarity emerges. Clarity is the first tool of psychological order. The second ritual is reduction. You shrink your world into what you can control. In collapse logic, control is oxygen. You define your perimeter, your tasks, your protocols, your fallback rules. You strip away anything intangible, philosophical, or emotional. The collapsing world overwhelms those who try to hold on to it in its entirety. Survivors reduce reality into operations. You control your shelter. You control your silence. You control your reactions. You control your choices. The rest is irrelevant until proven otherwise. The next ritual is rhythm. Humans collapse psychologically when they believe time has stopped mattering. In the dark, hours stretch and distort, and without a deliberate internal cadence, fear fills the void. Before Nightfall, you establish a mental timeline: when you will listen, when you will rest, when you will check equipment, when you will rotate posture, when you will reevaluate the perimeter. This rhythm is artificial but necessary. Without it, the night becomes endless. With it, the night becomes segmented and survivable. Then comes emotional sterilization. Fear is expected. Panic is not. You do not eliminate fear. You isolate it. You understand what is rational and what is phantom. You confront the scenarios that scare you and mentally rehearse your responses so that when the darkness tests you, you do not respond emotionally, you respond procedurally. Panic is the enemy's greatest ally. It sabotages your intelligence loop, corrupts your movement protocols, undermines your perimeter logic. Before nightfall, you inspect your fear like a tool, not an opponent. Finally, you impose continuity. The collapse will attempt to convince you that every night is an ending. But endurance requires the opposite belief, that every night is an interval, not a conclusion. Operational continuity means understanding that the world does not end at sunset. Your mission does not end. Your survival does not freeze. Night is simply phase 2 of a larger system. When you adopt this perspective, darkness loses its emotional power. You stop seeing night as the enemy and instead see it as another battlefield governed by rules you have already prepared for. The truth is harsh but simple. The first battlefield is always internal. Those who fail there die quietly, often without a single external threat crossing their path. The ones who survive night after night are not superhuman. They are structured. They maintain psychological order in a world designed to break it. Before the sun falls, you lock your mind into that order. Because when the lights vanish, when the noises stretch thin, when your thoughts want to spiral into the void, it will not be your shelter or your supplies or your defenses that save you. It will be the discipline you imposed on yourself in the final light of a world that no longer exists.